The morning light filtered through unfamiliar curtains as Harold Jenkins opened his eyes, a peculiar disorientation gripping him as he stared at the ceiling fan that shouldn't be there. Where had the white light gone? Where were the sobbing faces of his children and grandchildren who had surrounded his deathbed just moments ago? Harold sat up, his body responding with an ease that shocked him. No arthritis, no weakness, none of the ailments that had plagued him at 93. His hands looked different somehow, the liver spots and prominent veins replaced by smoother skin and neatly trimmed nails he didn't recognize. Was this heaven? Was this some bizarre afterlife he hadn't been prepared for despite his moderate church-going and general adherence to the Golden Rule? Harold swung his legs over the side of the bed, noticing unfamiliar pajamas on an unfamiliar body in an unfamiliar room. A woman stirred beside him, someone who was decidedly not Eleanor, his wife of 62 years. "Morning, David," she mumbled, "you were making the strangest noises in your sleep." David. The name struck him like a physical blow. He wasn't Harold Jenkins, the retired accountant from Springfield with 3 children, 7 grandchildren, and 2 great-grandchildren. Or was he? The memories of his life as Harold remained intact, crystal clear, from his childhood on the family farm to his final breaths in the hospice facility. He remembered the Depression, the war, college on the GI Bill, meeting Eleanor at a church social, the birth of each child, promotions, retirements, losses, joys, the slow decline of old age. Harold, or David, stood up, nearly falling as his muscle memory failed to match his mental expectations. He stumbled to the bathroom, flicking on the light to reveal a stranger's face in the mirror. A man in his 40s, dark hair flecked with gray, a small scar above his right eyebrow that Harold had never had. Where was the wizened face he'd grown accustomed to over 9 decades of life? The face in the mirror looked as bewildered as he felt. Days passed in a fog as David attempted to navigate a life he apparently had but couldn't remember. He was David Mercer, associate professor of English literature at a small liberal arts college, married to Catherine for 15 years, father to teenage twins he couldn't quite tell apart. He nodded at colleagues whose names escaped him, taught classes on books he seemed to know despite never having read them as Harold, drove a car he didn't recognize to a house he'd apparently chosen. The dream remained vivid, refusing to fade like normal dreams should. Had he really lived for 93 years as Harold Jenkins, or had he simply experienced an exceptionally detailed dream? Catherine grew concerned as David withdrew, spending hours staring into space, sometimes responding to David only after several repetitions. "Maybe you should see someone," she suggested after he called her Eleanor for the 3rd time that week. "I'm worried about you," David agreed, though not for the reasons Catherine imagined. He wasn't suffering from a mental break, he was suffering from an existential one. If his life as Harold had been real, and it felt as real as this one, what did that mean about reality itself? What did it mean about death? After several unremarkable sessions with the college's staff psychologist, David found himself researching more esoteric possibilities. His search led him to Dr. Aaron Leibowitz, a parapsychologist at the State University whose work touched on theories of consciousness, reincarnation, and what he called nested realities. David sat awkwardly in the cluttered office, surrounded by books on quantum physics, consciousness studies, and Eastern philosophy. "So you lived an entire life, died, and woke up here," Dr. Leibowitz stated, surprisingly matter-of-fact, as if David had merely mentioned the weather. "And now you're uncertain which life is real, or if both somehow are." David nodded, relief washing over him at not being immediately dismissed. "I've documented 17 similar cases," the parapsychologist continued, pulling a thick folder from a filing cabinet. "The details differ, but the pattern remains consistent. A complete life lived, death experienced, then awakening in another reality with full memories of the previous life." Dr. Leibowitz leaned forward, his eyes intense behind wire-rimmed glasses. "What if both lives are equally real? What if consciousness doesn't end at death but transfers to another nested reality? What if we're living countless lives simultaneously, each one nested within another?" David's mind reeled at the implications. "Like those Russian dolls," he murmured. "Matryoshka dolls, yes, precisely," Dr. Leibowitz nodded enthusiastically. each life contained within another, perhaps infinitely. Over the following months, David returned to Dr. Leibowitz's office weekly, discussing theories of quantum immortality, multiverse hypotheses, and Buddhist concepts of samsara. The most troubling question, Dr. Leibowitz mused during one session, is whether there's ever a final life, a base reality, or if it simply turtles all the way down, so to speak. David found himself lying awake at night beside Catherine, wondering if she too had lived other lives she couldn't remember. Was everyone around him experiencing only this reality, or were they all carrying hidden lifetimes within them? He began noticing small details that seemed to connect his lives. A particular melody that had been meaningful to Harold now playing in a cafe David frequented, a distinctive turn of phrase that Eleanor and Catherine both used, coincidences that perhaps weren't coincidences at all. As David integrated his memories of being Harold into his current existence, his emotional landscape transformed. The petty concerns that had once occupied his mind, departmental politics, mortgage payments, the twins' college fund, seemed inconsequential against the backdrop of having already lived and died. Death, which had terrified David before, now held a different kind of mystery. Not an end, perhaps, but a doorway to yet another life. At times, this knowledge brought profound peace, at others, existential vertigo. If this theory is correct, David asked Dr. Leibowitz, does anything we do in any particular life actually matter? The parapsychologist smiled enigmatically. Does the fact that you'll eat another meal tomorrow make today's lunch meaningless? Each experience shapes consciousness, regardless of what comes after. 6 months after his awakening, David found himself sitting on the porch swing with Catherine, watching a summer thunderstorm roll across the horizon. You seem better, she said, squeezing his hand. Different, but better. David considered telling her everything, about Harold, Eleanor, the farm, the accounting firm, the grandchildren, the hospice bed, the white light. Instead, he simply returned the squeeze. I've gained some perspective, he replied, watching lightning split the darkening sky. That night, David dreamed of Harold's life again, but this time it felt like watching a movie he'd already seen. The details were familiar but distant, belonging to another time, another self. He wondered if somewhere, in some other nested reality, Harold was dreaming of David's life with the same detached recognition. Dr. Leibowitz's research expanded, with David as his primary case study. They co-authored a paper that was predictably ridiculed by mainstream academia, but generated intense interest in certain philosophical circles. Even if we never prove it scientifically, Dr. Leibowitz said, the concept of nested lives offers a framework for understanding consciousness that transcends our limited perspectives. David found himself approaching his current life with renewed intensity, noting details he might have overlooked before, savoring experiences that might seem mundane to others. If this life too would someday be a memory carried into another existence, he wanted those memories to be rich and fully lived. On particularly clear nights, David sometimes stood in the backyard, gazing up at the stars, contemplating the possibility of infinite lives stretching before and behind him like pearls on an endless string. Was there a purpose to this cosmic recursion? Was consciousness gradually learning something essential through these serial experiences? Or was it simply the nature of reality, neither meaningful nor meaningless, just endlessly unfolding? David never found definitive answers, but he discovered a profound acceptance of the mystery itself. Years later, as David's hair turned fully silver and the twins had children of their own, he sometimes caught himself wondering which reality he would wake into next. Would he be young again? Old, male, female, human, something else entirely? The uncertainty that had once terrified him now felt almost like anticipation. When David Mercer finally closed his eyes for the last time at the age of 78, surrounded by Catherine and their children, he felt himself moving toward a familiar white light. Part of him expected to wake up in yet another life, another identity, another reality. Perhaps he did, perhaps he will, perhaps he always has and always will, moving through infinite nested lives like a cosmic traveler with no final destination. The question remains unanswered, a puzzle box with no solution, an enigma wrapped in the mystery of consciousness itself.